Hello, hello. Can I get a sound check in the chat? Let me know if you can hear me, y'all. I set up 3 lives, all the lives for the rest of this book, and I was sitting in the wrong live. I was sitting in the live for tomorrow wondering, where is everybody? Sound check, sound check. All right, well, Wayne, refresh that browser. Happy Saturday, everybody. Peace, world peace. Welcome or welcome back to Goddess Dawn Speaks, aka the $1 Trillion Goddess, baby. We are back live and in person, reading Faith Evans, Keep the Faith. We are in chapter 22, winding it down, wrap. I have all the other lives set up for the rest of the chapters tonight, tomorrow. Okay, tomorrow will be the final read. I also have some little clips and things I want to show, some interview clips, Faith Evans, Charlie Baltimore, and whatnot. And yeah, we're going to get into it. I just want to thank everybody. Thank you for your time, your engagement. I appreciate you. So yeah, let's hop right into it. The chapter 22, Till Death Do Us Part. Now, remember in chapter 21, she did let us know that she never spoke to Big following that last conversation they had. And, it was pretty sad to read. So we're going to find out. Oh, wait, this is 22. Wait, let me fix this real quick. So we're going to find out what happens next. Now, mind you, she let us know they hadn't spoken, but he hadn't passed away yet. So I guess that's what's next. All right. And let me shout everybody out, though, before I jump in. If you are in the replay, chill, okay? You can fast forward through it. But listen, the energy is real. Faye, I see you. Wow, Wayne, Shamina, DJ, Italian Red, welcome. Hey, hey, hey. Alicia, hello, hello. Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay, just want to make sure I have everyone who is here. And to you in the bushes, shout out to you as well. All right, chapter 22, Till Death Do Us Part. Now, Faith starts out by letting us know that she flew out to Los Angeles on March 5th, 1997. On her flight, she saw Lisa, a friend of D-Rock's. They were friendly too, and she'd become an occasional liaison between her and Big. Bad Boy didn't send her to the Soul Train Awards, so technically she didn't need to be there. She hadn't been nominated for any awards, and she'd released 3 singles and videos for her album, so there wasn't much more promotion to do. But she still wanted her presence felt. She knew how important it would be to keep her name out there. Since CJ was 4 months old and she was able to start traveling again, she felt like going out to the Soul Train Awards was the equivalent of finishing up her maternity leave. She didn't plan to attend the actual awards, but she knew there would be other opportunities to connect with her supporters and perhaps secure songwriting work. She had started recording her second album and had a few songs under her belt already. When their flight landed, she walked out with Lisa and waited for her car service to arrive. It was a typical sunny and warm Los Angeles afternoon, and she sat with CJ on her lap, a hard, tiny stool outside the sliding glass doors near the luggage claim section. CJ was a little bit fidgety from the long flight, so she had to bounce him on her knee to settle him down. She had her head down, kissing CJ on the cheek, when she saw a black Suburban pull up about 20 feet away from her. Someone had come down to pick up Lisa from the airport, and Big was in the front seat. She knew he was there, but she purposely didn't look his way. She was waiting for him to acknowledge her. Same here, DJ. Lisa went over to Big's car and put her luggage in the back seat. She saw her talk to Big briefly and then walk over to her. Big want to see the baby, she said. Can I take him over there? She didn't say anything. She just handed CJ over to her and turned her head away from Big's direction. She glanced over briefly and saw Lisa holding the baby up to Big's window. She could see him bouncing CJ on his lap and tickling him under his chin. After a few minutes, he handed the baby over to Lisa, who brought him back to her. Maybe I can come by your hotel this weekend and get the baby, she asked. She gestured toward the car. I think Big might want to see him. Her car pulled up and she stood. We'll see. He can call me, she said. She stayed at the Universal Hilton. She could have stayed at the Mondrian or the Standard, right in the center of where everything would be going on. But something told her to stay somewhere on the outskirts of town. She was already figuratively in the center of everything. She didn't need to be literally in the middle of the festivities. The day she came to town, she got a call, or the day she got to town, she got a call from a DJ at a local radio station. She wanted her to come on for a brief interview. Faith, he said, you're not afraid to be out here in LA while all this tension is in the air? I've always had love for Los Angeles, she said into the microphone. I've been coming out here since long before I had a record deal. I hope the people here still have love for me too. The phones began to light up. The callers were so supportive that it made her feel better, at least temporarily. She hadn't decided when or how she was going to deal with Big. She knew she wouldn't be able to avoid him for the entire weekend. She did want to see him, but she wanted him to reach out to her. She was also hoping she could spend time with Todd, so she wasn't completely focused on just seeing Big. On her second night in town, she went out with Speedy, a friend of Big's from Harlem who she was cool with too. She was hanging out with him and his friend JJ, driving around, talking shit, and smoking weed. As they pulled up to a light at Sunset and Laurel Canyon, she saw the Suburban that Big had come to the airport in. She was sitting in the back seat behind Speedy, who was driving. Is that Big in that car? She asked. Speedy looked over. Yeah, he said, that's him. Damn, she said. I ain't in here. As soon as they pulled right up to the car, she dipped down to the back seat to hide. She brought her face up just enough to peek out of the window. She saw Big roll down his window and she put her head down again. It wasn't a big deal to be in the car with Speedy and JJ. She just didn't want this to be the first time she spoke to Big. She was hoping to talk to him one-on-one, not bump into each other randomly. What up, Big? What's good? She could hear Speedy saying. I'm chilling, Big said. Word, we just trying to find something to get into tonight, said Speedy. The light turned green, but Big's car didn't move, so Speedy didn't either. Yo, Big said, I got a question for you. She could tell by the sound of his voice that he was leaning out of the car window a little. Any of y'all seen my wife? Her heart stopped in her chest. There was a hint of playfulness in his voice. She wasn't sure if he knew she was hiding in the back seat and was trying to let her know, or if he wanted to get the message to her that he was looking for her. Either way, she figured it was just a matter of time before she had to deal with Big. He was going to find her. He always did. And I feel like he knew she was in the back seat. The next day, she went to a celebrity basketball game. She was with her old friends from the early days, Tony and Curtis. And Roz, her good friend from home, was in town as well. Even though they were happy to be together, she couldn't say they were all out excited and celebratory. It was more of a low-key, chilled-out vibe. She was very conscious of the fact that she wasn't on her home turf. She was keeping a low profile. We going to the vibe party tonight? Tony asked. I'm going, I said. Were you coming with me? Of course. Do you think your mom will watch CJ for me? I'm sure she would, Tony said. I'll ask her. I want to go early, I said. I hear you, Tony said. Now you know Big is going to be there. Yeah, I said, nodding. I know. Are you going to talk to him? I might. On the night of March 8th, she was at her hotel getting ready to go to the Vibe after party at the Peterson Automotive Museum. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She did wear jewelry and a pair of gold hoops and a thin gold chain. She stood in front of the mirror, making sure her hair was neat. And then she slipped on her rings. She had several gold rings in different designs. Some were simple, some were jeweled. She put them on, one on nearly every finger, and then looked at a final reflection of herself in the mirror. They had their security drive them to the venue. She was in the front seat. Tony and Roz were in the back with CJ. They took the baby to Tony's mother's house first and got him settled in for the night. Then they made their way to Wilshire Boulevard. They got there a little before midnight, and it wasn't crowded at all, which is exactly what she wanted. Her plan was to case the place first, finding the right spot to chill and stay put. Cha-cha! Let's go right to the bar, Tony said. I'm right behind you. Tony, Roz, and Faith posted near the bar and ordered screwdrivers. She sipped her drink slowly, taking in the scene. Someone walked up behind her and leaned down to speak. Well, if it isn't Miss Faith. It was singer Christopher Williams. Hey, Grandpa, she said as she hugged him. It had been so long since she would tag along to the studio with Kai when he was working with him, even before she got pregnant with China. In a way, her career had jumped off because of Christopher Williams and the way life brought them together. He had encouraged her quite a bit in those early days, which made her more confident when she started to work with Albie Shore. It was good to see someone like Christopher, someone who knew her way back when, who understood her true character and what she was really about underneath it all. I'm proud of you, Faith, Christopher said. You've come a long way. She smiled and held up her drink for a quick toast. Thanks, Christopher. They clinked glasses and spoke for another quick minute before he moved on to work the room. She stayed put with Tony and Roz on the other side of her, swaying to the loud music and keeping her glass full. A few minutes after Christopher left, Heavy D came to the bar to get a drink and saw her sitting there. Faith Evans in the house, he said in a loud voice. They hugged, and he kissed her on the cheek. It was always great to see Heavy. He was gregarious and jovial and never failed to make her smile. A few months before, she'd done some writing for two of the acts on his label, Soul for Real and Monifa, and he'd been very supportive of her efforts to do more songwriting for outside acts. Heavy is one of the coolest guys in the music business, just laid back and fun-loving. And when you see him at a party, you know you're going to have a good time. What up, Hev? He grabbed her hands and made her do a little dance with him right at the bar. She laughed out loud and tried to wave him off. Nah, girl, he said. We partying tonight. You know how we do. She knew just what Hev meant. She was never the type to get ushered into VIP at a party. She wanted to dance and have a good time. That's what she loved about hanging with Mary in those early days of being signed to Bad Boy. I'm coming back, Heavy said, pointing at her as he got his drink and walked away. And I will have you out on that dance floor. Other folks came and greeted her warmly. Within an hour, the club had become packed, shoulder to shoulder. Tony and Roz and Faith were squeezed tighter and had to constantly move one way or another to let people get to the bar. When she finally had her back to the bar, she had a pretty good vantage point of the entire venue. But as the space began to fill up, it became harder to see who was coming in and going out. Tony nudged her in the ribs with her elbow. There go Big and them, she said. She jutted her chin out and nodded toward the entrance. She leaned back at the bar and sipped on her drink. I see him, she said calmly. She couldn't make out each member of the crew, and she wasn't looking at them directly. But out of the corner of her eye, she could see the outline of Big's heavy frame limping with his cane. She was able to make out Damien, Cease, and Gutter as they came in with him. And then she saw Puff with his security guards, Wolf, and Paul. If they had all come in earlier when it wasn't so crowded, she may have walked over and said hello. But as it was, she was not going to maneuver her way through the crowd just to say hello. She had a little too much pride for that. Through the crowd, she saw a familiar round face. It was Cease, and he was inching through the crowd in her direction. She'd known Cease for just as long as she'd known Big. He was standing right there the first time she met Big. In the glory days of their marriage, she'd spent nearly as much time with him as she had with Big. What up, Faye? He said, smiling. She gave him a tiny smile, but kept an aloof look on her face. She knew he was there as Big's representative. What you doing over here? He asked, rolling a blunt. Chilling, she said. You saw Big? He asked. I know he over there, she said, turning her head into the opposite direction. You coming over to where we at? I'll be over there, she said. She and C smoked together for a minute, and then he was gone. Absorbed back into the thick crowd between where she stood and a small alcove that Big and his entourage were tucked into. It was clear that Big had sent C's over to scope her out. But she was trying to play it ultra super cool. She didn't want to cramp his style and look like she needed to be in his space. It was Big's night. The DJ was playing Big's new song on repeat. It was Hypnotized, a simmering track with a rich bass line and an infectious hook. Every time the song came on, everyone in the venue started nodding and singing along to the chorus. It seemed like the crowd was really hypnotized. The song had a mellow groove, and everyone seemed to absorb it. And then it was suddenly like someone had scratched the needle across the record. She could only hear snatches of random conversations as people started to move in one direction. Overcrowded, police, shut down, fire department. We gotta go, Tony said. They're shutting it down because it's too crowded. Tony, Rosin, and Faith began following everyone else out through the exits and toward the underground parking structure. When they got outside, it was just crawling with people. Not any large groups, just a lot of people fanning out everywhere. As they continued to make their way to the car, she heard a series of loud pops. Pop, pop, pop. It wasn't loud enough for them to duck, but it was loud, but it was enough for them to stop and wonder where it was coming from. What the hell was that? She asked, craning her neck to see something. I have no idea, Tony said. Next to them, a group of people who worked at one of the record labels began getting into their SUV. Y'all going to Andre's party? One guy asked. Where is it? She asked. Up in Hollywood Hills, he said. Y'all can follow us. She told the driver to follow the car, and they began to file out of the parking structure and up to the hills. It only takes a split second for your life to be irrevocably changed, even when you have no idea that it's happening at that time. That night, she was 23 years old, and as the car left the parking lot of the museum, her life, as she'd known it, was over. As the car climbed the Hollywood Hills, she laughed and joked with her girls, not knowing that her world would never be quite the same again. It wasn't just her world. Her daughter, 4 years old, was 3,000 miles away with her family, while her son, just 4 months old, was a few miles away with Tony's mom. Their lives were changed forever at that moment, too. And it wasn't just our lives or their lives that have changed. Hip-hop music had been forever altered in this moment. The music industry would never be the same. Violence and hip-hop were about to be linked together in a massive media event that would have reverberations for years. A violent crime had been committed, as their car climbed those hills. One that would not be solved immediately. As you read these words, she's still trying to piece together what happened that night and to find out who was responsible. And is she still trying to bring those people? And she is still, she said, trying to bring those people to justice. There is so much she wished she could tell the younger version of herself. The young mother of two driving with her friends to an after party. She had no idea at that moment her husband's chest had been cut open. His heart was being massaged in an effort to get it beating again. As she sat in the front seat watching the scene rush past her window, she didn't know that her son was in the process of losing his father and that her daughter was losing a stepdad that she loved. And she was about to be thrust into the spotlight to handle things the best way she could. She had no idea what kind of grief awaited her. Boy, that was deep. So I'm gonna continue here with chapter 23. Walk with me. Just give me a second to drink a little of my tea and whatnot. All right, a little brief intermission. Don't go nowhere. All right, y'all. Thank you for your patience. Let's get into chapter 23. Walk with me. But let me check these comments first before I go on. Let's see. Faye said only 23. Wow, I knew she was young, but I didn't realize how young. Yeah, she's super young right here. Already with 2 kids, a marriage, well, now widowed. Yep, it only takes a second for your whole life to change. Truly. Yeah, truly heartbreaking. All right. Yeah, let's get into it. Okay, thanks, Faye. She was numb. She sat on the small, hard chair in an antiseptic waiting room at Cedar Sinai and cried her eyes out. The rings that she'd torn off her fingers in a panic scattered on the room around her. Who brought you here? Puff asked her in a soft voice. Roz, she told him. Puff left to find her and brought her into the waiting room. She came over to where, okay, he went to go get Roz. I'm like, who? Okay, so and then Roz came over and sat and helped her stand up. Roz, they won't let me see him. I know, Faye, Roz said, hugging her tight. Come on, we have to get out of here. Roz, I can't leave. I can't leave Big here. Why can't I just see him? Come on, Faye, she urged. She let her head her out of the hospital right through the same door she'd come in. The crowd had gotten larger and there were a lot of familiar faces in it. Where is everybody? She asked. What do I know? Roz led her to. What do I do now? She asked. And Roz led her to a waiting car and driver. We're going back to your hotel. And what happened to Puff? They got in the car and drove. Oh, they said Diddy was escorted to a private jet or something, like in the back of a undercover cop's car or something crazy. I heard about that. Anyway, let's continue. They got in the car and drove to the Beverly Hilton. She kept her head low and dissolved into more tears every few minutes. Todd came by the hospital, Roz said. He just wanted you to know he was there. She nodded and turned her head to stare out of the window. It was the middle of the night, and as they drove, she kept getting hit over and over again with the knowledge that Big was gone. This morning, she thought, this morning right here, he is not going to see. When she got to her hotel room, it immediately began to fill up with her friends, Roz and Tony and Big's friends, most of whom had been with Big when he died. Damien was there, as well as C's and Gutter. She didn't know where Puffy was. She never saw him after they left the hospital. She can only imagine he was probably shocked and terrified. None of them knew where he was. Her room quickly became command central. She kept moving, trying to focus on taking the very next breath and trying to get the next moment out without breaking down. Of course, the first thing they all did was try to figure out who did it. Who did this? Is this about Tupac? Tony asked. Would niggas really kill Big over that? I don't think this is about Tupac, she said. People know Big had nothing to do with him getting killed. Well, then what the fuck? Someone said. Cease, she said. You were there. What did you see? I just saw some dude with a close cropped haircut and a bow tie. He pulled up right next to us. Why would they do some shit like this to my man? Someone asked. I don't get it, she said. It makes no sense. That's a big risk to take, said someone else. They shot my man in front of a crowd of people. Yeah, she said, and whoever it was knew that Big always sits in the passenger seat. Those bullets were meant for Big. They continued to talk, cry, and connect for hours, trying to figure out what went wrong. She got a call from Todd. He was in the area and wanted to come by and check on her. She told him to please come through. The room started to get really crowded, and she ended up talking in the bathroom with D-Rock. Yo, I got a friend coming through here, she told him. Damien nodded and passed her the blunt that he just finished rolling. Look, he's from out here, but he's cool people. He's really been good to me. It's all good, Faye. She started to cry. Damien comforted her. Everybody know you had love for Big. Don't even trip over that shit. There was a knock on the door, and she left the bathroom to let Todd in. Hi, Todd, she said. They hugged briefly. I just wanted to check on you, he said. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Thank you, she said. It was awkward. She had been looking forward to seeing Todd that night. She wanted him to know that she really liked him, and she was hoping they could see where their feelings might take them. But the timing just kept being off. In Atlanta, he had to walk by and see her hugged up with Big. And now she was completely on another planet. It was good to know that he understood. Just let me know if you need anything, he said. And I mean that. Todd stuck around as a few people went back to their own hotel rooms. Then he got up and prepared to leave as well. Don't go, she told him. I know you have a lot going on right now, he said. I don't want to. Please, she said. Please don't leave. I can't stay here alone. Todd stayed with her a little longer. She knew she had a tough time ahead of her. She felt so vulnerable and alone that she needed the comfort of a friend. Later that morning, she had to call Miss Wallace again. Damien had called and broken the news to her initially. She needed to know if she needed anything from her. She was coming on the first flight out. Um, she told her that she was bringing Jan with her. I'll have a room ready for you when you get here, she told her. Faith, is this really happening? Is Christopher really dead? She tried to answer her, but nothing would come out. She cried softly. I just can't believe this, Damien called, and he was just crying and crying and crying, and I knew something was wrong. And there was all these people gathered outside the house. Oh, Faith, I can't believe my son is gone. She wanted out of Los Angeles as fast as possible, but she knew they'd have to make arrangements to have Big's body flown out to New York. She had to find out the steps to take to make that happen. She was a little bit overwhelmed. After making a few calls, she learned that the first thing to do was identify Big's body at the city morgue in Los Angeles. She knew she wasn't going to be able to do that on her own. The last time she'd seen Big was out of the corner of her eye at the club. Just 2 days before, she dug down to avoid seeing him when his car pulled up to hers. And at the airport, she tried her best to ignore him when he pulled up. There was no way she could have her last look at her husband without some support. When Miss Wallace arrived at the hotel, they hugged and cried together. Jan was standing right next to her with tears streaming down her face. She reached out and took her hand and squeezed it. She'd never gotten to know Jan. They rarely crossed paths, and she'd always kept a low profile. But any differences they may have had melted away as soon as she saw her. She knew that what she'd meant to Big, and she was the mother of the daughter he was absolutely crazy about. And now the three of them were at an ad hoc family. The women who would have to take command of the situation and stay strong for everyone. Most of the people from New York who had come out for the Soul Train Awards were already back home the morning after Big was killed. There was a lot of fear and uneasiness about what was going on. She wanted to run away and just bury her head under a pillow. She wanted someone to comfort her, hold her, and tell her everything was okay. She didn't have that option. She needed to be all those things for Miss Wallace and Jan, the same way they were for her. After they got settled into their hotel rooms, she'd arranged for a car to take them to the morgue to identify Big's body. She had to say she was amazed at how calm Miss Wallace was. Her only child, a son she loved dearly, had been killed violently, and she was stoic and proud. She may have still had been in shock, but when she first arrived after a brief crying jag when she first saw her, she was all business, and she seemed more angry than sad. How could this happen, Faith? She yelled out as they drove. Where was all the damn security? All she could do was shake her head. They definitely had security with them, she told her. I'm sure of it. So how did this happen in front of all those people? I have no idea, she said. Miss Wallace sucked her teeth and rolled her eyes. Where the hell is Puffy? I'm not sure. I think he went back to New York. Not here? What do you mean he's not here? My son was killed and he left? Miss Wallace, you got to understand things are really crazy right now. Miss Wallace sucked her teeth again. My son is gone. Someone better have some answers for me. I wish I could do her accent. Do you know if he was in any pain, Jas? Oh, that's Jan. Jan asked softly. I don't know, she said. I could only imagine that if the bullet ricocheted throughout his body the way the doctor described at the hospital, he must have been in pain. But she couldn't bring herself to tell Jan and Miss Wallace that. When they got to the morgue, they led them to a small waiting room. Her stomach was doing flip-flops. She felt like she was going to throw up. She took in a sharp breath and stilled herself. She knew she had to be strong. She closed her eyes and prayed that she could see Big without falling apart. Miss Wallace stood between Jan and her. They were all tense, waiting to see what the next step would be. She wasn't sure if they were going to bring Big's body into that room with them or if they were going to be led into another room to see him. Someone came into the room as she was assuming it was the coroner or someone of that nature. Very sorry for your loss, he said. He was holding a few Polaroid pictures in his hand. They were going to need you to identify the body from these photographs. The man laid out 3 pictures of Big. They were horribly graphic, and she took in a sharp gasp when she saw them. Oh, Jesus, she whispered. One second. Okay. She could describe every detail of how Big looked in that picture, but she will not. It is too painful, not just for her, but for Miss Wallace too. She will say this. She looked like she had been fighting for his life, and she had just passed away before the pictures were taken. I can't identify my son this way, Miss Wallace screamed. How do I know for sure that's my baby? I need to see him. Let me see my son. Well, actually, it's let me see my son. Miss Wallace began to cry hysterically. She and Jan tried to comfort her. Her cries grew louder and she continued to yell out. I don't know for sure. That could be someone else. That's him, Miss Wallace, Jan whispered. That's him. No, she said, shaking her head vigorously. How do you know? Miss Wallace looked over at her. Faith? She asked. She nodded. It's him, she said. Miss Wallace, that's Christopher. She seemed to deflate. It was as if Big's death didn't really hit her until she saw those photographs. And it was particularly difficult because they wouldn't let them actually see him. As hard as it would have been, they would have all preferred to see him in person. They didn't need, she said, they needed to see him, touch him. That was the only way it could really be real. Did you see him? She asked me. Did you at least see him when you got to the hospital? She shook her head as fresh hot tears streamed down her face. No, they wouldn't let me. They left the morgue and headed back to the hotel. It was time to make a lot of decisions. There was no one else left in Los Angeles to make things happen. Miss Wallace was going to have to trust her, and they were going to have to work together. She wasn't with Big when he died, but she was still his wife. She couldn't be concerned about how she would be perceived or what people were thinking about her. She had to focus, think about what Big would have wanted her to do, and then just get it done. First, they needed to find a funeral home that could prepare his body and then arrange for him to be flown back to New York City. Later on that afternoon, they went to a nearby funeral home. The associate there talked them into purchasing a $15,000 solid oak casket. He told them that it was the best one and it would be sturdy enough to support Big. Jan had to get back home to Tiana. So they got a car to take her back to the airport. Miss Wallace and Faith stayed one more day to take care of some last minute details. Are you sure? She said, I need to go to where this happened, Miss Wallace said on their last day. Are you sure? She asked. Faith, I never got a chance to say goodbye to my son. I couldn't even touch him. I need to see where he was at that moment. Take me there. She had their driver take them to the Peterson Automotive Museum. They stopped at a florist and purchased a bouquet of white lilies. When they got to the corner of Wilshire Boulevard, she asked the driver to let them out and wait for them. She walked Miss Wallace to the front entrance. This is where we were that night, she told her, pointing out the museum. Miss Wallace looked around. She put her hand to her mouth and closed her eyes. They stood close and placed flowers right next to the building. After a long moment of silence and reflection, Miss Wallace and her turned away from the building and all the ghosts surrounding it. They trudged back to the car and prepared to bury the man they both loved. Miss Wallace, CJ, and Faith arrived back in New York on Thursday, March 13th. Big's body had been flown out and was at the Frank E. Campbell Funeral Home in Manhattan. They wanted to have the service right away, but Miss Wallace's sister was getting married that weekend, so they were going to have to postpone the funeral for a few days. It was a bit unsettling knowing that Big was not at rest, but it made more sense to celebrate before they grieved. As soon as they landed, they had to pick up China from her grandparents, who, of course, had already heard the awful news. What happened? China asked. Daddy got hurt, she told her. He was shot with a gun, and we're not going to see him anymore. She made a point to tell China the exact truth. She didn't want to sugarcoat anything, but she still didn't seem to understand the finality of what was going on. They set up camp at a hotel on the Upper East Side in New York City, near the funeral home. By that time, she was living in New Jersey, and it was easier for her to just stay in Manhattan rather than driving back and forth every day. Miss Wallace and her went to Big's house in Teaneck to begin the process of cleaning up and looking for any necessary paperwork. They decided it would be best for Miss Wallace to stay there until the house could be sold. One afternoon, they were going through the living room cleaning up when the phone rang. She put down a basket of laundry she had gathered. Hello? Can I speak to Miss Wallace? Who is this? She asked. It's Tiffany. She called out for Miss Wallace to pick up the phone. How are you? She asked me before I gave the phone to Miss Wallace. I'm all right. She gave the phone to Miss Wallace and kept it moving. She knew that Big had been dating Tiffany at the time that he died, but she was his wife and she had no responsibilities. She had responsibilities that she had to deal with. There wasn't really any room for her to befriend any of the auxiliary people in Big's life. She wasn't cool with her when Big was alive. There was really no need to try to force relationship because he died. In addition to cleaning and straightening the house, they had to make sure they knew where all Big's assets were, including his 3 cars. He had a Mercedes sedan, a Chevy Suburban, and a Land Cruiser. Since he didn't drive, different people would have them, and she wanted to make sure they were all accounted for. Eventually, they figured out who had what, but his Land Cruiser was in Philadelphia at Tiffany's house. They had the dealership call to confirm Tiffany's address, and then Miss Wallace told her that it would have to be returned. Someone she couldn't remember who told her she had a fit, crying and saying that Big gave her that car. Whatever. They had the dealership go to her house in Philly in the dead of night and put that truck right on a flatbed and bring it back to Teaneck. Damn. She said she had no sympathy for Tiffany. The car wasn't paid for. Okay, well, there it is. She didn't know what arrangements she had with Big, although she did find a wish list of things she wanted from Big. Oh, tell us. But she had to secure his property and pay his bills and keep everything organized at the same time they were working out the logistics for the. She did understand that she wasn't the only woman in Big's life. In all honesty, she had never been. But for whatever reason, he married only one of them. And so the responsibilities had fallen on her shoulders. Lisa, the girl who had been a go-between for her and Big in LA, told her that she had heard Tiffany had tried to she tried to unalive herself when she heard about Big being killed. And then Miss Wallace told her how Kim was crying, telling her that she was coming with her and Jan to Los Angeles. What did you tell her? Faith asked. Miss Wallace rolled her eyes. I said over my dead body. Damn. Neither of them had any patience for catering to the feelings of people who probably genuinely love Big, but didn't have an official place during such a sensitive time. She was sure Tiffany and Kim were both distraught and grieving, as they all were, but she just could not concern herself with their needs. A representative from the funeral home called to let them know they would come and view the body. They could come. Miss Wallace had prepared to go over there. She and Miss Wallace. I don't know what's wrong with me, y'all. Please forgive. Let's see how much more we have. All right, hang with me. She said, Miss Wallace sat on the large pine bed and ran her hands across the comforter. I don't want to make a spectacle of my son's death, she said softly. It won't be, Faith said. It will be tasteful. Why can't we just have a completely private memorial service? She asked. Just close family and friends, and that's it. She shook her head. We can't do that, she said. There were so many people whose lives Big touched. And it doesn't have to be open to the general public, but there are a lot of people who need closure too. Miss Wallace nodded. I guess you're right. It's all too much. The media, all these people. It'll be okay, she assured her. I know my son, she said with a smile. He would not have wanted anything small. She smiled softly. He wanted he want all of Brooklyn to be there. You know that's right, she said. I'm going to let Brooklyn say goodbye after the service. We'll go by St. James Place on the way to the cemetery. I think that's a great idea. The Frank E. Campbell Funeral Home has held services for foreign dignitaries and celebrities like Frank Sinatra. It's swank and elegant and full of cherry wood furniture. There are several meeting rooms with plush sofas and fireplaces, and they did their best to make the atmosphere less depressing. But even with the luxurious accommodations, when she walked in with Miss Wallace, she couldn't forget the reality of why they were there. Big's body was there, and they were going to have to view him and make sure he was prepared for the services. Right this way, said the director. They followed him to a viewing room about 10 feet in front of her. She saw the solid wood casket Miss Wallace and her picked out in Los Angeles. It was completely quiet in that room. It was beyond quiet. The room was carpeted, so she couldn't even hear her footsteps. As she walked up to the casket to see Big, she felt like she could hear his voice in that room. Even before she could see him up close, she could see the way he was so very still. She had never seen him so quiet. His presence was so thick around her that she felt like she could hear him talking. She saw him flipping through her pictures at that photo shoot. What's your name? Then there he was sitting in front of her seat in her Land Cruiser in front of 226 St. James. I'm going to marry you. She could see him putting China in that cardboard box and rolling it around. Nah, China, you got to stay in this box forever. Holding both her hands, they stood in front of the clerk in Rockland County. I, Christopher George Latour Wallace, do take you Faith Renee Evans. She got closer to the casket, reached out to touch it, and opened her eyes. She breathed a small sigh of relief. Big looked like Big, not in pain like the picture at the morgue. Miss Wallace and her noticed that at the top of his head was a large scar. It made them uncomfortable. She felt a sense of peace after finally being able to see Big. But then she was troubled all over again when she saw the scar and noticed that he didn't seem to fit into the casket properly. She and Miss Wallace went into the office after viewing Big's body, and she asked them if they could replace the casket. They were so pissed. They'd spent thousands of dollars on that damn casket in Los Angeles, and they didn't even make sure that Big could fit in it properly. Miss Wallace and her decided that they would have to go ahead and purchase another one. They picked out a new casket and explained to the director that they were going to need a lot of assistance keeping uninvited guests from attending. I'll have car services for people coming from Brooklyn, Miss Wallace said. If they're walking in from off the street, they cannot be let in. The director nodded and jotted down some notes. We'll do our best to safeguard your privacy. She felt like she didn't want Big to be overly exposed during the services. There were going to be at least 200 people there, and she didn't like the idea of people touching him. She sung at enough funerals to know that people who were grieving could sometimes go too far and end up defiling the body with too much contact. Sometimes she noticed that there would be a white netting draped loosely over the open half of the casket, and she told the director she wanted that for Big. You would still be able to see Big clearly, but random people would not be able to touch him. Something about that made her feel better. At the hotel, Miss Wallace and her talked to Mark Pitts about what Big should wear. This guy from 5001 Flavors was making him a white suit, Mark said. He had all his measurements. I think we can have him finish it. She thought about the scar on the top of his head and shuddered a bit inside. He needs a hat, she told Mark. Make sure you get a fedora for him. She still needed to get some music ready for the funeral. She would not It would not be enough to just have an organist. It has been a long part of their tradition and culture as Black folks to infuse farewell services with heartfelt singing. She contacted the members of 112 and asked them to sing Cry On. And then she called her old friend Donovan, the same guy who'd eaten with her at Jay's restaurant in Newark, every day when she was pregnant with China. She asked him to play the organ and asked Sean, one of her background singers, to accompany him. What about you, Faith? Donovan asked her. Are you going to sing? She thought about it, but she just couldn't envision herself having the strength to do it. No, she told Donovan, I'm not going to sing. The morning of the service was a bustling commotion of children and people and conversations about the logistics of getting hundreds of guests to the funeral home. Miss Wallace hired dozens of cars to take people from Brooklyn to Manhattan. The family left from the hotel in a cavalcade of limousines. CJ, China, and Tiana were dressed in all white. They had piled into the limousine and headed over for the short ride. The finality of what was happening started to sink in, and she felt like she was shrinking in the seat. While they were preparing for the funeral, she hadn't had to actually think about the time when it would just be over. And that moment was approaching. She had no more business to take care of involving this day. And once the funeral was past, she was going to have to get on with the business of living, with 2 children, one of whom would never know his father. China was wearing her usual one ponytail and a little puffball on top of her head and looked up at her. Mommy, she said, Daddy still hurt? Yes, he's still hurt. He's not going to come back. We're not going to see him anymore. China thought this over. She could practically see her wheels turning in her head. So we'll see him tomorrow or another day? All she could do was sigh and kiss the top of her head and look out of the window of the car. When they got to the front entrance, there was a small crowd there. Photographers and reporters lined the street as close to the front doors as they could get. Security guards and police officers kept uninvited guests and random people off the street from getting too close. Her good friend Roz wasn't able to get a ride from Jersey, so when she got there, they made her stand outside for the whole service. That always bothered Faith, especially since she had been with her the night Big died. Their limo pulled up directly in front. They all got out and made their way to the funeral home. The room was designed to hold up to 250 people. They had at least 300 people packed in, if not more. Ushers walked her, Miss Wallace, Puff, Mark Pitts, Jan, her siblings, and the kids to the front row. In the second row were her girls, Tony, Cheryl, and Lisa. There was also Joyce, who was CJ's godmother. She was sitting next to her grandmother, her mom, and her Aunt Hope, and her godmother, Dorothy, her friend Latrice, and her Aunt Pee-wee, and some of Big's extended family. One row behind them were Damien and C's, Lil Kim, and the rest of Junior Mafia. As they all entered and took their seats, Donovan began playing I Will Always Love You. And then, as Sean, my background vocalist, began to sing, she heard a voice crying out, Yes, I will. I will always love you. It was Lil Kim. And every time Sean sang a line, she would get a bit louder. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yes. I love you. Miss Wallace, sitting next to me, had her lips set into one thin line, Not even opening her mouth a full inch, she leaned over and whispered, Somebody better calm her down or take her out. She couldn't speak on what Kim was feeling. She knew people grieved in different ways, but it just seemed extra to her. And no one was setting that tone. This is why Miss Wallace wanted to have a private service, so that she wouldn't have to deal with this kind of thing. It wasn't that it was disrespectful. She just didn't understand why Kim had to be the loudest person in the building. Miss Wallace came to the front and read a verse from the book of Job. Her voice was clean and unwavering, her eyes glassy but not teary. She only glanced at her briefly before putting her head back down. She was having a hard time focusing on who was talking at the podium. She kept her head down unless someone spoke to her directly. The members of 112 came to the front, assembled themselves, and then waited for Donovan to start playing Cry On. Their unique four-part harmony was as crystal clear as she remembered from the first time she'd heard them in Atlanta. While their voices were soothing, it was a raw beauty that felt almost too intense. She could hear soft moans and cries coming from different parts of the crowd, but she couldn't lift her head to look at anyone directly. She just hummed along, swaying and crying. She sat there and breathed deeply, trying to hold on to the pressure, the presence of Big that she felt all around her in that room. She and Big had not been together when he passed away, but she loved him deeply and was proud to be the mother of his child. She couldn't even fathom not being able to call him and curse him out or cook him her world famous lasagna or sit in the car and listen to his latest song. She was focusing so hard on feeling his spirit that she felt like he was speaking to her. You can't sing for me? She sung at many emotional events, from weddings to funerals, but this was different. There were so many people, and some were small, and some small part was still a bit concerned about how people would perceive her. She just wanted to stay in her seat, and keep looking at the floor. Remind you, she's only 23, right? She's receiving the receiving line began, and hundreds of people walked from the back room down to Big's casket and then turned left past the first row and then back to their seats. Their row was led first, followed by she followed Miss Wallace, Lance and Rivera, Big's good friend, carried Tiana in one arm and China in the other. She saw China's face when she looked down at Big, the man she called Daddy. She thought she finally understood the finality of what was happening. They returned to their seats as the people continued to file down, take their last look at Big, and then walk past their row, offering hugs, squeezing hands, and giving small words of comfort. She barely remembered all the people filing past her, but she appreciated every pat on her shoulder or a small hug. There was Heavy D, who had told her that Big had been shot. Jay-Z was there, as well as Queen Latifah and Foxy Brown. There was Busta Rhymes, who'd often stop by her in Big's apartment to say hello. Tiffany came down wearing a full-length fur coat, flanked by two of her girls. She stopped at Big's casket, cried for a minute, and then was led away by her friends. A few minutes later, Lil' Kim walked to the casket. Mary J. Blige was supporting her because she wasn't able to walk without breaking down. She stopped at Big for a moment and cried, and then Mary began to lead her away past the row where she sat. Kim kept crying while Mary addressed everyone in her row briefly. When Mary got to where she sat, she didn't say one word. She just held Kim's arm and walked further down the row. And then she continued offering her condolences to the other people seated next to her. She was stunned and she was hurt. She knew she was cool with Kim, but her and Mary went way back, way back. And she knew she never had any beef with her, ever. She couldn't comfort Kim and offer her sympathies to her at the same time. She made sure that people like her and Kim could be at the service. When Miss Wallace said she wanted a family only ceremony, she talked her out of it. And now we couldn't put us, she was saying we couldn't put aside petty bullshit at Big funeral. She felt a stirring of something inside of her that she couldn't name, but it was more powerful and emotional than her grief. She could hear Big's voice again. You can't sing for me? You better get your ass up and sing, girl. She watched Mary walk to the back of the room, still stung by her dismissal. Big would have not liked it, none of it, and she knew he would have been pissed off that she wasn't singing during his service. She leaned over to Mark. I'll go up, she said. She had spent too many years concerning herself with what other people thought about her. She had to move out of the cloud that she had cocooned herself in. She had never been the type to really put herself out there and address crowds unless she was performing. But something overtook her, and she composed herself and walked to the front of the room. Mark addressed the audience. Big's wife, Mrs. Faith Evans Wallace, is going to sing for her husband. She stepped up and took the microphone. This is not for Big, she said to the crowd, her voice soft but clear. This is for all of us. There's a lot going on here right now, and it's not right. The media is saying that we're fighting with each other. She shook her head. We cannot sit up here and still fight with one another about petty things. Not after all the grief that we have seen this can cause. We need to pray. I think we all need Jesus to walk with us. All right now, Faye, she heard her mom say from her seat. The energy in the room became prickly with electricity. Before she sang one note of I want Jesus to walk with me, she felt people leaning into her, preparing to hear the word. As she sang, she saw hands fly up into the air, just like when she was a little girl. It seemed like some people had no control of their bodies as they stomped their feet and shook their heads. Members of 112 began to shout, completely overtaken by the intense spirituality of the song. There were certain times when a gospel song can pierce an audience and take them collectively to another place. She felt like this was happening as she sang. Before she could get to the end, there were many people on their feet testifying and co-signing. When she was done, the room erupted in a combination of more tears, hands being raised, and rousing applause. She floated back to her seat, tingly and spent from the experience. It felt like the exact right thing to do in that moment. She stopped staring at the floor and sat up straight. There was no reason for her to hang her head. Big was gone, and she knew she would grieve for him for the rest of her life. But she also had a responsibility to celebrate his life, to make a joyful noise in remembrance of his time with all of them. As the service came to an end, she felt a sense of peace. They filed out of the funeral home and into the waiting cars. It was time to go to Brooklyn. She could not believe the crowds lining FDR Drive to watch Big's final ride. It was truly a magical moment. They drove down FDR toward the Brooklyn Bridge and saw throngs of folks standing and cheering. People were hanging out of office windows and waving and yelling. Oh my goodness, Miss Wallace whispered. She could only smile. Big would have loved it. When they got over the bridge and entered Brooklyn, it was complete bedlam. They drove down Fulton Street, and there were literally thousands of people pouring out of their homes and stores, standing on top of cars, blaring Big's music, chanting and cheering, pumping fists in the air, crying, laughing, smiling, waving. Her heart flipped over at the sight. Big, who was once called the mayor of St. James, was really getting back all the love he had for Brooklyn. The cavalcade made its last stop at a cemetery in Queens where Miss Wallace was going to have Big's remains cremated. After leaving, they went back to Big's house in Teaneck. Dozens of Big's friends and family members were there, along with enough food for 10 times as many people. There were catered dishes from Sylvia's in Harlem, and there were soul food dishes that her grandmother and her other family members made as well. At Big's house, the vibe became more festive. They laughed and joked, sharing funny stories about Big's life and the type of person he was. Yo, y'all gotta watch this, D-Rock said. He walked over to the television in the living room and turned the DVD player. Some dude sent this to the offices over at Bad Boy, and Big ended up with it. D-Rock turned it on and they all gathered around. There was a man, tall and super skinny, with a long, dripping, wet Jerry curl. He was riding a unicycle in circles in the middle of what looked like a country road. Yeah, look at me, the man said. Look what I can do. You gotta sign me to Bad Boy. I'm the first hip-hop cyclist. Look at me. Y'all can have me on stage at your concerts. They all roared with laughter, not just because it was the silliest thing we'd ever seen, though it was, but because they could see why Big would love it. Yo, Big made us watch this tape over and over and over, D-Rock said, shaking his head and laughing. It seemed weird, but it was really special to sit there and watch that insane video. Because knowing how much Big loved it says so much about who he was and why we were always crazy about him. In essence, he was still a fun-loving man who enjoyed life to the fullest. And now that would be their job, to live life to the fullest in honor of Big. And that concludes Chapter 23, y'all. Whew, that was deep. That was deep. R.I.P. Big. Yeah, for sure. You know, a lot of things that happened to Faith during that period happened to me as well. Not a lot of the things, especially when she was in high school. None of that stuff. And I didn't have a cheating husband like that. But, you know, he was murdered actually 2 months before Big. So a lot of what happened, it just resonated. That's why I had to like take a breather. Everything she was talking about, the fine and the body and all that, which I didn't do. I let his mom, I couldn't do it. But anyway, let's see, any comments? So DJ, yeah, we love the 90s music. Let's see. Licia, is that how you say it? Licia Najee. I'm currently catching up on Who's Watching Shorty, but now I'm here. Thank you for the audiobook. Shh, don't say audiobook. But you're welcome. And thanks for catching up on the readings. Yes, thank you guys for the donations too, by the way. I've gotten some trickling in. Man, where's my phone? I wanted to thank personally somebody who's been consistent, but I can't. I'll do that separately. But yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, R.I.P. Pac and Biggie. Y Hines, happy Saturday to you. You're at the beginning. Okay, well, once you get here, hopefully you will. Shout out to you for catching up on the reading. This is the Warrior Books. This is the reading room of the Warrior Book Club, y'all. And you guys are warriors, and we are reading books from warriors. Faith is a warrior. You know, she had her time of being abused. She's been through a lot, especially with men. She got in her own way a lot too with situations, but she was really young. So mind you, she's still in her early 20s. She had to grow up really fast. And, you know, the next chapter is Every Breath I Take. And I believe that's going to go into what was going on, you know, with Bad Boy after Big died. And mind you, it was a little bit conspicuous that Puffy was a little bit missing in action during this part. But I guess because she was the wife taking care of all the business with the mother, he didn't really have a place there, right? And plus, he was probably too busy being concerned about what was going to happen in the aftermath of Big's death. But this next chapter should be really good because the song Every Breath You Take, he's being criticized for that to this day by the way he handled the aftermath of Big's death. Like it was his time to shine, apparently. And, you know, he's still, you know, trying to do that, even though now he's locked up. Yeah, it was a whole lot. Yeah, so we have 2 more chapters. One I'm doing tonight. They're already all set up. You guys, if you could head over there just to like and comment as we wait for those lives, because the algorithm will pick that up. I appreciate that so much. So yeah, I'm reading tonight, and then tomorrow will be the final reading, and then a little bit of a recap of things, video clips, and you know whatnot. Shout out to everybody though for being here, whether you are live or in the replay. I appreciate you greatly. Like, share, subscribe, and all those wonderful things. And yeah, peace and love and peace. Until next time, have an amazing day.